opportunity. I want to start, Mukelani, with you. And the question would be, well, ODAC is very known as an organization that has been working on freedom of information, yet at the same time, you have been working on some of the issues such as housing and access to water. So my question would be is that how you have been using freedom of information to improve the lives of the poor?
Thank you very much, Yervand, and good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It is true that even though we are an organization that was established to promote the implementation of South Africa's access to information law, we ended up doing quite a lot of work outside the area of pure access to information legislation campaigning. And this is because soon after we established the center, we realized that in the context of a developing country, you need to be able to make access to information and the access to information legislation meaningful to the people that you are trying to serve in that country. So, for example, in South Africa, we have social and economic challenges. We have quite a big gap between those who have access to resources and those who do not. And so it was necessary to link the usage of the Access to Information Act to try and make an impact at that level. Because when we started talking to people, raising public awareness about the legislation, we would say to them, you have a right to information and there's the Promotion of Access to Information Act. People would sit there and say, okay, that's nice to know, but what is in it for me? You know, what does this thing mean for me as a person living in an informal settlement, or as a person who lives in a village that doesn't have clean drinking water for my children? So we had to move from the level of the abstract and try and talk to people's needs. And so the work that we ended up doing was to go out to communities and say to them, what are your challenges in the community where you are? And people would say, I've been living in a squatter camp or informal settlement for 15 years. And I know that our government is providing free housing for people who are like me, who are in my position. And so what we then did was to say to people, look, using the Access to Information law, you can get information from government institutions that will give you more information about why you are remaining in this condition. So, for example, you can get a housing list, for example, and the housing list will tell you how many people are in the housing list and where do you fit in the housing list. How have you been prioritized as a recipient of government housing? You can also make requests for information relating to the budgets that your municipality has provided for delivery of housing in your area. So, for example, if you get a budget that doesn't have a line item that says housing for the poor, then you need to start challenging and start talking to your councillors, your local councillor, and say to them, why is it that my area is not in the budget in terms of the housing delivery plan? When will my area be part of the budget so that we can then get houses? So those kind of applications where we're linking people's needs to using the Access to Information legislation. So then I think for us, the Access to Information law purely stopped becoming a priority, but it was what it can do for a person. It was not just about getting access to a record, but what do you then do when you receive the information? How does it change your living circumstances? And I think we've been successful in that way of trying to raise public awareness about the Access to Information law by linking it to accessing services.
You were telling earlier that you've been using FY to work on certain areas, developmental issues, but you have been working on FY itself, the law itself and its implementation. And you know, like in every country, I'm sure in your country, implementation is not smooth, and you've been working on that. I want you to tell us a little bit about this experience, and I would encourage you to start asking questions. We don't have too much time, so if we can make this a more interactive discussion as of this point, it would be nice.
Thank you. The work that we've been doing in terms of law reform and advocacy really is based on people's practical experiences with using the access to information legislation. The biggest flaw in our law is that it doesn't provide for an information commission. So a disappointed requester needs to go to a court of law to get a review of a decision of a department to refuse him or her access to information. Basically, this provision in our law means that quite a number of South Africans, those who don't have access to resources, and they are in the majority, will never be able to exercise the full extent of their right of access to information because they won't be able to go to courts, to get courts to order release of information that they are entitled to. And so in the work that we've been doing with various NGOs and community groups, we have picked up on this issue that there's a limitation in the exercise of the right because we don't have an alternative dispute resolution mechanism on requests for information. And so what we have done is to engage with both government and parliament on some of the flaws that we have seen in the legislation. So our major advocacy point right now is to try and get the law amended to create for the establishment of an information commission because it's becoming a major issue. In the 10 years since the law was passed by a parliament, we've only had 15 cases that have been reported in our courts. And there's quite a lot of resistance or reluctance by especially NGOs to, once they have made a request for information and they've submitted it to the department and they were not happy with the response they received, they then sit on it because they are afraid to go to court. That's what is most important, is its access to information practice. I would like to emphasize what Maxwell was talking about earlier, that we are not trying to replicate or proliferate access to information laws. I don't think that should be the focus of our energies and efforts. But what we are trying to do is to improve access to information practices with a law or without a law. And so all of this work that is currently being done in South Africa, whether it's in terms of law reform and advocacy or in terms of litigation, it's all aimed towards improving implementation in terms of bettering the practice.